Episode 243. Today we're talking about some standouts between Chicago and Nashville from last night's matchup. A game in which could have went either way. I think it was a lot of back and forth. Steven Stamkos ended up getting a hat trick for Nashville. He looked terrific in this game. I feel like he's always looked terrific against Chicago. He's a player who's obviously had a down year, but I don't really think this is the end of the road for Steven Stamkos. I think we're going to see a lot more from him in the coming years in Nashville. I think this is just one bad year. And for him, like after being a dominant player for so long in the league, I think it makes sense to have one down year is totally fine. And for any player in the league, I think it's not necessarily a sign that they're winding down, but more necessarily something that they can bounce back from because he's been used his whole career to being a 80, 90, 100 point guy, and this down year, quote unquote, can really allow him to have a sort of resurgence in Nashville in the coming season. So I think this is actually a good thing for him, and this was a positive showing from it. I feel like especially of late, and I haven't watched a ton of Nashville in general, but the guys like Stamkos and Marcia Show have been more noticeable. I think Jonathan Marcia Show's always been a guy that has stood out against Chicago too. And Steven Stamkos has always been a guy that has stood out against Chicago. Like those guys, those premier guys, have always been noticeable. And they've always looked to create offense. Ryan O'Reilly's another guy who's always been noticeable against Chicago. And even when he was playing in Colorado, when he was playing in St. Louis, he's always had that flash to his game. And I think outside of that, Nashville's an interesting team because they have a lot of moving parts. They obviously moved a lot of pieces and moved a handful at the trade deadline. And they ha had some waiver pickups recently as well, including Jordan Oesterle and Jacob Verana, and just some other guys kind of thrown in that mix from Milwaukee as well. So I wouldn't necessarily say a younger team. I would just say more of an inexperienced team that needs a little bit more learning to really jump and really get better down the stretch of the season. I don't think Nashville is as bad as the record shows. I think they're a team that's actually underrated because they've been playing bad this season, so their team can often get underrated, especially with the talent that they have on their team. I think it's actually an underrated team in some ways. But with Nashville last night, I just think just a lot of their guys were noticeable. And we'll talk about Woodridge, Illinois native Spencer Stasny as well, who actually played for the Chicago Mission growing up. I think he was really noticeable last night. I think he was one of their most noticeable defensemen. And with Roman Yossi out, guys have had to step out or step up, and guys have had to contribute in many different ways. And obviously, it's hard to replace Yossi offensively, but you can fill the void with guys who can bring steadiness, bring reliability, and can log a lot of minutes. I think Spencer Stasny is really a guy who can contribute offensively but also play a two-way game. He's sound defensively, he's sound at shutting plays down defensively. I thought he was really good holding the line defensively in this game yesterday. He was really good at quick ups on breakouts, really good at quick ups and transitioning from regroup situations in the neutral zone. I think he doesn't bring a ton of flash. He brings more of a north south style defensive game and puck moving game. I think that's what you're getting out of him, but he's been reliable. I think that's been a positive sign to see is that he's been reliable, he's been steady, he has showcased his skill. And another guy who's really noticeable is Jonathan Marchessault, and we talked about him briefly to start, but just the pedigree that he brings playing such a long time in Vegas, he was always really noticeable in Chicago. And now him staying in the West and being with a new team, that being Nashville and actually being in the Central now, I think he's always a guy you're going to have to watch out for in terms of Chicago playing against Nashville because Jonathan Marchessault is a premier offensive talent who can score in a variety of ways. He's really good around the net, but he also can shoot from range. He's got tenacity that's like a dog-like mentality where he's always looking to get the puck. He's always looking to go after the puck. He's always looking to attack the puck. He's always looking to find ways to engage offensively, and I think he's really skilled at being able to contribute in many different ways. I really enjoy watching him. He's still one of my favorite players to watch on Nashville in general, just because he's an all-around player, but he competes, he plays defense, and he forechecks like crazy. So I think those type of players, especially when they're your top players and they're veterans, bring a lot of value to your lineup because those are the guys that other younger guys can really lean off of and just learn from, not based on the words, but based on the actions. Like Jonathan Marshall, his actions indicate that he's a guy that still competes, he still forechecks, he still plays defense, and that you should too if you're a younger player in Nashville. If he's doing it, then you should be doing it because of his reputation. He's won in the league and he's become a very good player in the league too. So those are guys that were really noticeable. And then on Chicago's side, I think Connor Bedard was the best player in this game. For Chicago, that is. I think he was creating off the hop a lot, creating a ton of chances right from the first period on in to the third period, and he was highly effective. He's so noticeable and really good sign to see him being your best player. You really want to see that. You really want to see him create those opportunities on a regular basis. I think he was an extremely effective player in tight, really maneuvering guys and maneuvering through traffic. He was really doing a great job of getting out of pressure against sometimes two or three guys, maybe even four, and just did a really great showing in terms of puck skill, finesse, ability to weave through traffic, ability to move laterally with the puck, and shows that versatility in a variety of ways, which is really awesome to see on his end. And Ryan Donato, who again, I think I really understand why they didn't trade him. I could understand both ends of it. I was part of me was like, okay, trade him if you can get a first round pick and maybe even more on top of that, you trade him. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, if you sign him to a long-term extension, which is probably around, I would say, anywhere between 4.5 and 6 million at this point. Something like a Zach Hyman contract, the way he plays and the style of game he plays. I think Ryan Donato brings a lot of value to the team. He brings a lot of leadership, a lot of grit, a lot of tenacity, a lot of offensive skill, a lot of defensive play, a lot of forechecking, competitiveness, just all around value. That this is something that the rebuilding process can really benefit with moving forward is having him here. And I think he's a guy that's going to be wanting to sign a long-term deal too, just because of how he has fit with the group, how he's fit in Chicago. And he's always been on shorter term deals. Through I believe 3 to 4 years max are contracts he's always been on. So he's always been moving around. I would imagine at this point of his career at 28, 29 years old, that he'd want to just stay put somewhere for a longer period of time and have that value with the family that he has coming in. I think that'll be very important for him to try and make a long-term decision more than a short-term commitment now. I think Chicago is going to be a long-term place for him. I really do see it, especially if the Hawks didn't trade him at the trade deadline. I feel like this is a player that they see as someone that they can keep long-term and not necessarily play all the time with Connor Bedard on his line, but be a guy who can provide all-around value. The cap's going to be going up, so if you sign him to an AAV anywhere of 4.5 to 6 million per year, eventually down the road, the percentage of that money that will go towards the Blackhawks and their cap situation is going to be lower and lower. So with Ryan Donato, you're not necessarily going to have to worry as much about that, which is also nice. I think what's interesting about it is studying what he could be long term because he's obviously having a career year. Does he regress? Does he stay consistent with where he is now? And I think it's a perfect fit for him in Chicago. He seems to like it in Chicago. So that'll be interesting. And then I want to touch on Alex Vlasic, who had a goal in this game, two shots. And I honestly thought against Utah on Friday, it was one of the worst games I've seen from him. He really bounced back last night. And I think he knew coming off that game against Utah, they didn't play his best. Players always know when they don't play well, so you don't really need to explain that to them. I just think with Vlasic, he was not that great on Friday night. And again, a very rare situation where he doesn't play well. He's one of the most consistent defensemen on this Blackhawks team. Shows up every single night, plays the same way. You know what you're getting out of him. I think in terms of how he played yesterday. He played so much better, especially offensively, recovering via stride usage, D zone play, stick on puck play, defending with his range and his reach. I think he just looked a lot more comfortable boxing out guys, defending one-on-one, using his stick, using his hands to get physical with guys. He looks so much better. I think down the line, this is a guy who, if you can rely on him like a Jamie Alexiak or Colton Parayko or someone like that who can play a very physical game, I think this could be a defenseman who could be very dangerous and even produce even more offensively down the line too. So we'll see what happens with him. But he was awesome yesterday, and he had to mention that. Colton Dock was also really effective just in terms of the physical play, forechecking, angling guys off on the forecheck, being able to play defense, play PK, shut plays down. And then Ilya Mikheyev, I think Ilya Mikheyev has been an okay fit in Chicago. I don't think it's been the best fit. I think he's more of a bottom sixer. And I would imagine come next year's trade deadline, the 2026 trade deadline, he gets traded because that'll be the last year of his deal. And I just don't see him coming back to Chicago. I think it's an okay fit, but I just don't really see it working out for him long term in Chicago. Mikheyev's okay. I think last night he had a good game too. He's a north-south player without a doubt. He doesn't really show a ton of finesse or creative skill. He's more the guy who chips pucks in, gets them deep, and looks to recover, and that's fine. Some players are like that. Mikheyev's a guy who sometimes he's just all speed and he's all gas, but he's no brakes. He just doesn't really know when to stop sometimes. So I think that's the interesting situation with him. And it's like the guy from the Mighty Ducks movie who could skate, but he didn't know how to stop. I don't remember the guy's name. He's kind of like that. But just with Mikheyev, I think he's a guy who he is a forechecker. You can rely upon him as a forechecker in your bottom six, whether it be third line, fourth line. If you're playing him on your third line, you might get a little more scoring out of him and a little more playmaking out of him. If you're playing him on your fourth line, you're likely going to bury him a little bit more and just try to rely upon him as a north-south player with Pat Maroon down there and usually Lucas Reichel down there. And I think with the impact that he has, he's steady, he's reliable, he'll have some value come the 2026 NHL trade deadline. So I think that'll be an interesting situation to see how that all plays out with him as well.